Is it possible for him to speak down here? We're using the mic, or does he have to speak from he'd have to pay them. We thought it was easier for the Zoom. The Zoom is all set up. Oh, because of the Zoom. Right. There's a long Can we go up there? Can we go up there behind Hall?
You ready to go? Okay. All right. Good evening. Welcome both to the folks here present in this space and to the folks online. Hey, we're glad you're here with us this evening. I'm Reverend Paul Langston Daly. I'm the Minister for Social Action, and I thank you all for coming out this evening. As Unitarian Universalists, our values center love. We celebrate pluralism in our society, acknowledging that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We recognize our interdependence, that we exist within a complex web of relationships and interconnections. And we declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. These are some of the basic tenets of our faith and the reason that we support and encourage wise and compassionate immigration laws that are responsive to increasing violence, rising authoritarianism, climate change, and profound poverty driven by graft and greed. A large part of the authoritarian agenda is to label and exclude the other and to blame as many evils as people will accept on immigrants. As people of faith, this is not our way. As you use, our way is to open the circle wider, to care for the lost, the hungry, and those in need, to honor the dignity and worth of each and all, to recognize the value and the life of all life, and to honor those lives as sacred. As Unitarian Universalists, we continue to nurture and celebrate our civic society, our engagements in things that matter, our real and deep belief that we are all connected, and that each and every one of us matters, no matter where we're from, no matter what our economic status is, no matter how we think or how we believe and practice our religion. Each of us, without exception, has inherent worth and dignity. We're pleased to have you all here this evening and to offer this opportunity to reflect on the state of our immigration policy and the ways in which we can together work to co-create a more humane immigration system. Again, thank you all for coming. And now I'd like to welcome leaders from our Immigration Task Force, Ted Bain and Lori Van Loon, who will share a little bit about the work of the Immigration Task Force here at First Parish. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, Paul. Yes, well, I'll give you a little history. Some years back, two of us from First Parish volunteered at detention centers in Texas. We were inspired by stories of courage amid trauma. We wanted to do something more. So about 5 years ago, we joined forces with others in the congregation who were concerned about immigration and human dignity. We formed a social action group with that concern at its center. And tonight I want to give an especially warm and grateful shout out to Tony Rodriguez, our fearless mentor and activist in all these very busy years since we started.
Our mission statement says, the mission of First Parish Immigration Justice Task Force is to support vulnerable migrants, to take action in response to immigration injustices in our country, and to educate ourselves and our fellow parishioners about this continuing crisis.
We lobby at state and national levels for humane and reasonable responses to migration, teaming up with other organizations with these same goals, for example, the Unitarian Universalist Association. And we've collaborated with refugee and immigrant services organizations to offer direct service, such as in years past, accompanying our sanctuary guests, and in the past year and a half, extensive support to Afghan refugee families.
We have dedicated ourselves to activism, connecting with multiple grassroots-led and ally-led organizations, advocating on their behalf and identifying those deserving of attention and support. If you did not receive a list of those organizations, look for a sheet on the table in the back of the room. We reach out to our congregation and beyond to inform them of our activities and efforts and to alert them to urgent initiatives where they can make a difference.
We take seriously our goal to educate ourselves and our congregation about shifting patterns of migration and migration policy, such as our event tonight. So Joyce, would you please introduce our speaker?
Good evening. I'm here to introduce Mustafa Shisti, who's going to be speaking on immigration policy in 2023, challenges and opportunities. Mustafa Shisti is a lawyer, a senior fellow and director of the Migration Policy Institute at New York University School of Law. His work focuses on immigration policy at the federal, state, and local levels, immigration enforcement, civil liberties, and immigrant integration. He serves on many boards, including the New York Immigration Coalition and the Asian American Federation. He served as the chairman of the boards of directors of the National Immigration Forum and the National Immigration Law Center, and was a member of the American Bar Association's Coordinating Committee on Immigration. He has also testified extensively in Congress and at state levels, and is frequently quoted in the media, including the New York Times. And he tells me that this morning he was actually interviewed on NPR, All Things Considered. He often is interviewed for NPR. Prior to joining the MPI, Mr. Shisti was the director of the immigration project of the Union of Needle Trades and Industrial and Textile Employees Unite in New York, where my husband worked with him. He's authored many publications on immigration policies, migration enforcement, and rights of immigrants. And he's been a recipient of the New York State's Governor's Award for Outstanding Asian American and the Ellis Island Medal of Honor. So he calls himself kind of an immigration junkie. That's the word he told me. Immigration junkie. I couldn't think of the word. So please welcome our friend Mustafa Shisti.
Thank you, folks. I was telling her she could just dispense with the whole introduction and just call me an immigration junkie, and that would cover everything. I don't have neat notes with me that your prior speakers did, so I'll do my best from how I think about immigration these days. I first want to acknowledge that my friend Carl here, Joyce's husband, he and I were colleagues together at the union at a time when immigration was not a fashionable thing for unions. It was a brave thing for unions to be pro-immigrant at that time. Today, it's not only fashionable, it's actually expedient for unions to be pro-immigrant. There was a time when it wasn't, when it was very hard for unions to take a pro-immigrant stand. And I owe my career to that union, which allowed me to to learn this field and then to be rewarded by it. I also just noticed that my friend Kathleen Sullivan is here, who Kathleen, many of you don't know, was a very senior advisor to Senator Kennedy on immigration issues. And many of us had to go and beg her for her attention those days. And she is your ultimate experts on immigration and refugee policy. And I'm so glad she could make it here. So, I mean, I was coming up here, I was just thinking, what can I tell, smart, highly engaged group of people about immigration when immigration is in the news and surrounding us all the time? And then I thought that maybe I should do it in two parts. One is to tell you what is wrong with our immigration selection system. Why is it that we have a dysfunctional immigration system, which is leading to about 11.5 million unauthorized people in the country? And why is it that we have such strong labor needs for foreign workers and not enough legal channels for them to come, which is a crisis? And the other is what's happening at the border. And there are two distinct issues in immigration these days. They are somewhat tied to each other. And that's why I think it's important to talk about both of them. First, about immigration in general, taking away the sharp focus of the border that surrounds all of us these days. So that we don't start on a depressing note that we have become xenophobic a country and that Trump won his presidency on the back of immigrants. I never get tired of saying that Trump was the first and the only president in our history who used immigration on an anti-immigration platform as his calling card for presidency. That has never happened before, and hopefully it never happens again. So the Trump era gave many people the feeling that we've just become a xenophobic country. Let me tell you, we haven't. There are 45.3 million foreign-born people in the United States. That is more than 4 times the next 4 countries combined. I mean, more than the 4 countries combined. So that's about 13.6% of our population. US is only 5% of the world's population, but we take 20% of international migrants. That's not the picture of a xenophobic country. We are welcoming to immigrants because welcoming immigrants is the defining element of America. It is what makes America's DNA, and even 4 years of Trump presidency could not erode that. I actually gave a spiel to the big business group this morning, who are all concerned. Didn't immigration go down hugely under Trump? When can we recover? We have already recovered. Last year, we took 1 million legal immigrants to the United States. Before Trump, it was 1.1 million. During the 4 years of Trump, it went down. In the fiscal year 21 and 22, it went down about 700,000 people, but we have rebounded in a way that we are back to the normal of the first 2 decades of the 21st century. So that's all good news. But the bad news is that we still have a dysfunctional immigration system. We actually are in need of foreign workers for 2 basic facts. One is that we have become an aging society. And in an aging society, when the local born population does not produce enough people, then you have a labor market need, especially if we want to retain our position as the world's largest economy. So the basic facts about immigration are that we have become an aging society. The baby boomers are retiring at 10,000 a day. Demographers, and I'm not a demographer, I just speak to a lot of them, tell me we're going to reach a very important milestone in the next 10 years. By 2033, there'll be more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18 in the country. That is for the demographers, a landmark moment. Will by another 5 years, the 20% of our US population is going to be over the age of 65. Now, so therefore, we are getting the trappings of European societies and Japan. And they have taken long time to realize that immigration may be a solution for their, for their problem. We luckily have seen immigration as part of our DNA and part of our solution from our very beginning. So we are much more used to thinking about immigration as a solution. But it has been dysfunctional in the last about 20 years. So another point on the labor market need because of the aging of society is we have become a more educated society. I mean, at the beginning of the 20th century, only about 10% Americans graduated high school. Today, about 85% Americans graduate high school. That is great news for the country, but it has huge implications in the labor market. That people who graduate high schools and people who have some college, their aspiration in life is not to take low-wage jobs. So many of the low-wage jobs, therefore, is the huge demand, which is being met by immigrant workers. Now, you all know what these jobs are. These are jobs in the agriculture. These are jobs in the care industry, from elder care, child care, and health care. These are jobs in janitorial services. These are jobs in truck drivers across the US. These are jobs in agriculture. These are jobs in food processing. All the sectors of the economy where Bureau of Labor Statistics tell us that these are going to be the growth sectors of our economy. These happen to be the occupations in which immigrants are already overrepresented. So the parts of the sectors of our economy where we actually have labor market need are going to be jobs in which we have become more and more reliant on immigrants. Again, labor economists tell me that we have 1 million more jobs available in the country than we have unemployed workers. That actually, if you look at the labor market growth from 2010 to 2018, 80% of our labor market growth came from immigrants or children of immigrants. It's believed in the next 5 years only, all of the labor market growth in the country is going to come from immigrants or children of immigrants. So all these factors will tell you that we, therefore, really need immigrant workers for the labor market need. The second important need, which I think gets frequently less noticed, is our reliance on foreign workers for our social security system. We have an important, robust social security system, but it's under strain. Our social security system is a generational phenomenon. Like, I don't contribute to it for my social security. I contributed for my parents or our grandparents' system. So for our social security system to be self-sufficient, it needs young and active workers to make contributions. If we don't have young and active workers and we're not producing enough of them in the native-born population, we have to rely on foreign workers to meet the shortfall of the social security system. One fact which I always get moved to talk about is the contribution of the unauthorized people to the social security system. It's the least appreciated contribution of unauthorized immigrants, because unauthorized immigrants, typically, their parents are not here. Their grandparents are not here. They're not taking advantage of the social security system. And they will probably never be able to access social security system because they have worked in the underground economy. But employers make contributions, they still pay taxes, and those contributions get sent to the social security system, and the social security system puts all those contributions in something they call a suspense file, literally called a suspense file, where they get contributions from people. They can't match a real social security number to someone. They could credit it, they keep in the suspense file. The last time we checked, the amount of money in the suspense file of the Social Security Administration is $1 trillion.
Wow.
So if any of you want to talk about concrete contribution of unauthorized people to our economy and to our system, look at the suspense file of the Social Security system. I actually thought it was only 780 billion. I was actually making a spiel like this to a Florida audience, which is all of retired senior people. And someone raised his hand. He said, it's actually 1 trillion. And I said, how do you know? He said, I used to be the Social Security Administrator. so these are facts that are well known. These are not Republican facts, and these aren't Democrat facts. So you would tell me then, look, if all this is true, why aren't we taking in more immigrants for the obvious needs that you just stated? And this is where we come into our broken, dysfunctional immigration system. So that all of us, again, so that we're on the same page, is again, so we haven't become a xenophobic country. We take 1 million people with green cards a year. And in that 1 million people, 66, I think I looked at it this morning, 66% of people come on family sponsorship. We love families. It's a cornerstone of America's admission policy. We take people because, and they're spouses of U.S. citizens, they're children of U.S. citizens, they're spouses of lawful permanent residents. The most distant you can be for a sponsored immigrant is you're a sibling of a U.S. citizen. We take these people because we think family unification is important. We think it advances America's family values, and we think that when members come to join their family, they're not just family members, they're workers. That they come and contribute with their labor and with their expertise and with their talent. And they already have with the family, a bit of a buffer, a cushion, which helps them integrate. We are all in favor of family immigration. But when you look at the employment-based immigration in this pie, it's only 14%. About after the 1 million people we take every year as immigrants, 140,000 visas are available for people on the demonstrated labor market need of the country. Now, that 140,000 also includes their family members. When we take a worker, we also allow him to bring his wife or his young children with them. So actually, only about 7% of our total immigration comes from labor market need of the country. And if you look at low-skilled occupations, they're almost closed out. Only about 10,000 green cards a year are available for occupations which require less than a college degree. No wonder there are no legal opportunities for people to come. So as I like to say, in many ways, the laws of supply and demand are working magically, except illegal channels are used to meet them as against lawful channels. That is the summary of our dysfunctional immigration system. And one of the reasons why it is so is that we have a selection system. We have an immigration selection system, which is based on a 1952 architecture, which has been tinkered with only 2 or 3 times since. The last time it was tinkered with was in 1990. The present number of it, the numbers that we have in our immigration selection system, including the 7% that I mentioned, was established in 1990. Just imagine how the world has changed since 1990. As a friend of mine received, that's pre-internet. I mean, forget about we had Clinton in the meantime, we had Bush in the meantime, we had 9/11 in the meantime, we had an Iraq war in the meantime, we had an Afghanistan war in the meantime, we had the Great Recession of 2008, Trump, and COVID-19. We still haven't changed the number of people we admit to the US legally. Now, that doesn't make sense to anyone. It doesn't make sense to a Trump supporter or to an pick your choice, AOC supporter. So again, these are facts on which there really is no dispute. These are not Republican facts. These are not Democratic facts. The issue is that why doesn't it happen? And this is where immigration has become all about politics. As I keep like saying that facts do not matter in the immigration debate today. It's an odd thing for someone from a policy institute whose only job is to produce facts. They don't matter. Everyone knows facts. The debate has become about culture, identity, and to be increasingly about power. So if you are, and here I'll tell you another data point, which is not actually MPI generated, it's a Pew Charitable Trust generated, our competitors. And I didn't know this that concretely till recently. There used to be almost a bipartisan consensus on immigration in our country, till very recently. First of all, to tell you something which will surprise you more, is that we were not as pro-immigrant 20 years ago as we are today, as a country. Today, about 2/3 of Americans believe that immigration is very good or good for the country. 20 years ago, only about 40% of Americans thought immigration was very good or good for the country. But the number of Republicans and Democrats who thought immigrants were very good or good for the country was almost the same. They were like this. The division between Republicans and Democrats started happening in the beginning of the century. And by 2005, the difference now between Republicans and Democrats on their position of immigration is now 45% apart. Now, at some level, that explains everything. That if you are a Republican and you're seen as soft on immigration, the only thing that's going to happen is you're going to invite an opponent in your primary. On the other hand, to be bipartisan about this, if you're a Democrat and you're not intensely pro-immigrant, you will invite an opposition in the primary. So we are locked in our positions, which is formed not on facts, but on issues of culture and identity. Our view, as you know this more than anyone else, looking at the kind of work that you do, our country is divided on many things now. It's now become two Americas, whether it's gun rights, whether it's LGBT rights, whether it's abortion rights, immigration exactly in that column. It's a divided country. And a divided country, Congress becomes paralyzed. And that's what we have seen on immigration in the last 20 years. That despite the fact that facts are all in one direction, despite the facts that all employers tell you we need workers, despite the fact that COVID taught us our reliance on immigrant workers, that while all of us were on our Zooms, in our sweatpants, the people who would prepare our food, people who would harvest our food, people who would process our food, people who would deliver our food were all immigrant workers. Everyone realized it during that time. That was not enough to change the minds of members of Congress that we need to do something about the unauthorized population in the country, many of whom were delivering food and cooking our food at that time. That's how far the reality has gone from facts. So this is our paralysis. Now, just to say that we don't have any ideas about this, we at MPI, at Migration Policy Institute, have advanced an idea about it. We think that we have to reimagine immigration, for lack of any other better word. That we have to think about our selection system in a fundamentally different way. That the pie chart I talked to you about, and if there were slides here, the pie chart would look much more interesting than my waving my two fingers. That if you look at that pie chart, only 7% people are coming on the basis of labor market need. Actually, if it becomes more stark, of the 7% people that come on the basis of labor market need. And this is what we call new seed immigrants. These are people coming in without a family connection. They will come in and then they will bring their families in the future. So these are new seed immigrants. Of the new seed immigrants, about 80% of them are people who graduate from H-1B visas or L visas. These are high-skilled or intra-company transfers. 80%. Of those, about 75% are from computer occupations. Now, I have nothing against professionals of computer occupations, but would any of us feel comfortable that the future of our company should be exclusively descendants of computer engineers? Obviously not. So there's something wrong with the way our present system, and we can get into how companies have manipulated the game to make sure that it's set that way. But that's the reality. So we're not bringing workers in other occupations, even though there is a willing employer wanting to sponsor them. So we think we should reimagine this. So what we have said, therefore, we should keep families as they are. We can have some argument about some family classifications may not make sense today, but keep that apart. On the employment-based immigration, we think that we should have a new way of admitting people. That we should, on one hand, look at the Einsteins of the world, for lack of any other. That it should be obvious that if this person wants to come to MIT, he should be allowed in tomorrow. That's Einsteins of the world on one hand. Completely seasonal workers on the other, who just come to do one crop and they're happy to go home. That apart from these two groups, everyone else in the middle should come in a new category called a bridge visa. And why we like the word bridge, because we think it bridges occupations from low skill to high skill. Everyone from a garment worker to a physicist or a computer engineer should be allowed to apply for a bridge visa. They should be sponsored by employers. We should make sure that no US worker is being displaced or undermined in hiring a foreign worker. And then these people can come and work for 3 years. At the end of 3 years, if they want to go back to Mexico, El Salvador, they should be free to go back. And they can come back for another stint of 3 years visa as a bridge visa 6 years later. And if they want to continue in the US, they can continue for 3 more years. At the end of 6 years, they can go back, or they earn the right to become permanent residents. If they have shown consistent employment, good criminal, no criminal record, tax, all that stuff. And we think that we want to encourage circularity, that we are no longer in a world where people necessarily want to come and die in the United States. That a lot of people actually just want to come and work here. Many of them may not even want to bring their families. Actually, with a good salary from US, they may get better schooling for their kids in Mexico. But our present system doesn't allow that. Our present system is based on you come and burn your boats in the old country. That we think that's no longer true. That in the past, that kind of cosmopolitan existence was confined to rich people of the world. We believe that even middle-class people are now comfortable in living in more than one place in their lifetimes. And our present selection system just doesn't allow it. So we want to encourage circularity. And then on top of that, we want to introduce flexibility. That the number of people that we admit should not be locked in for 40 years, as is the case today. That we should change the number of people that we admit in every year, not on the basis of political whims of politicians or their political calculations, but it should be done by experts. Instead, as I like to say, it should be done by nerds. It should be done by labor economists, people who study the need of the labor market sectorally, regionally, and then they see how many workers are we producing in the family stream. At the end of every 2 years, they should present to Congress what we need for the following 2 years. And that should become the number. In many ways, close to what we do with interest rates right now. I mean, we change interest rates every quarter, don't we? But we don't change immigration system for 35 years. That doesn't make sense. That's because the Federal Reserve is run by a bunch of nerdy economists who make up those numbers. We think we want to return to experts making those decisions as against compromised lawmakers. So the idea of circularity and flexibility to us is important as we approach the next era. We think we should increase immigration. I think we should increase employment-based immigration labor. We think we can increase it 4 times. I think we can take 250,000 people a year at least in the initials before the labor economists tell us how many do we need in the future. Because someone has to establish the first number. I think we can multiply it 4 times and we still will need more workers. But that's the beginning. So this is our idea of the bridge visa, which we think will begin to address a lot of problems of our labor market system. If we take more people in the legal pathways, then we believe the pressure for illegal immigration will go down. As I said, the laws of supply and demand are meeting very smoothly. And reason why people, 11.3 million people are unauthorized, because no one wants to be an unauthorized person. No one prefers to be an unauthorized person. They don't have legal pathways, and there is a demand for their work. They enter through legal pathways. We want, in our words, we want to open the front door a little more so that the back door is closed a little more. So the pressure on the back door is closed. That is our idea of a reimagined immigration system. And one of the reasons this is not happening, this obvious thing is not happening, because of the paralysis in Congress and the diversion between Democrats and Republicans now on immigration, is the crisis at the border. The crisis at the border has taken all the oxygen in the room on immigration. I take no comfort in saying it. I actually came from a border study only about 6 weeks ago in San Diego and Yuma and then in Tijuana in Mexico. We have a crisis. And telling you that what I said, Republicans don't want to acknowledge facts, that facts don't matter. I'll say the same thing about Democrats, that facts don't matter. They don't want to use the word crisis. I mean, President Biden doesn't want to use the word crisis. He's not allowed to use the word crisis. And I'm sorry. I mean, if we cannot agree on a language, then how can we come to a solution? We can have disagreements about what the nature of the crisis is. We can have disagreement about why we have a crisis or how we should deal with the crisis. But to say that there's not a crisis doesn't make sense to me. When our mayor of the city of New York cannot house people who are bused there from Governor Abbott, and when New York-born people are kicked out of the shelters so that we accommodate someone from the bus, that is a crisis. 60,000 people have come to New York bused by Governor Abbott in the last 4 months. Guess how many of them are getting representation in the most liberal, most welcoming city in the world for immigrants? 0. That's a crisis. So therefore, if Democrats and Republicans can't even agree on using the word crisis, how can we find a solution? I mean, the same thing about debt, the debt limit. If the Democrats and Republicans can't agree that we have a debt crisis, then how can you find a solution? That, to me, I think is increasingly becoming part of the problem. So let me tell you what the crisis at the border is. We, again, not to use my 1952 archaic architecture system to more length, we have a policy, laws, resources, and infrastructure of the border that was built for the early 21st century. We have built a policy which was meant for a time when pressure at the border was single Mexican males trying to sneak into the US to get a job. That's how we built, that's how Congress created its system, and DHS, after it became DHS, was tasked to do. Now that border is completely old story. That specter of the border ended at least in 2008. Those of us who have followed the border. Beginning in 2008, first of all, Mexican illegal immigration actually went down. No one knows that because when man eats dog, no one doesn't make noise. The conditions in Mexico actually had improved during the Great Recession. We didn't learn much from the Great Recession, but Mexicans did. Their economy improved. And there are actually fewer people coming to the US after Mexico. So Mexican illegal immigration declined. But by 2012, a different phenomenon had happened. Central Americans were now the dominant force. And they were not only just Central Americans regular, they were families. And they were unaccompanied children. So everyone should agree that the policy that was developed for single Mexican males, that's not the policy that can be used for families and unaccompanied kids. No matter how brutal a Border Patrol officer is, he cannot deal with family and kids in the same way as he or she is trained to use for Mexican single males. That's the first challenge. Then the diversity of the pool of people coming to the border started changing. It used to be Mexican and then Central Americans. In the last 3 or 4 years, it's all over the world. Mexico has now become, this is my conclusion after my stay in Tijuana, is the staging ground from migrants from all parts of the world trying to get into the US. So it's no longer even a hemispheric problem. If you look at the pressure of the border in the last 4 years, the 4 dominant countries are Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. They're the biggest senders. We don't even have diplomatic relations with these 4 countries. We have diplomatic relations with 3. Haiti is a failed state, so we don't even have stomach to deport anyone to Haiti. So if you're running the DHS and you can't remove people to those 4 countries, what are you going to do at the border? You have a crisis. On top of that, Trump introduced a policy called Title 42, which all of you know. And they thought that they were finding the magical solution for the problem at the border. We'll just expel everyone. And all of you have heard about this. Title 42 just ended 2 weeks ago. I'm here to tell you that Title 42 had lost its salience by the time it was ended. It remained only as a talking point. To put sharper point, remained only as a political talking point. At the end of Title 42, only about 35% of my arrivals at the border were subject to Title 42. 65 people were not, 65% were not. If you look at countries outside Central America and Mexico, only 8% of nationals of those countries were subject to Title 42. So it was more on paper than in reality. So it had really just become a political tool. For the Republicans to say that Title 42 is the magic solution for our border crisis. This is what Trump developed and we should just keep it up. For the Democrats, it was a picture of cruelty, that we should end Title 42 tomorrow. How would Biden, you promised, and why didn't you? In reality, it had lost its significance. So we now replace Title 42, and again mentioned one of the reasons Biden was not able to end Title 42 because the courts wouldn't let him. It's a separate story. In a second, I'll come to that. Courts wouldn't let him. So Title 42 continued. It was only last week, literally last Thursday, the Supreme Court in a unanimous decision said you can end Title 42. So we're now back to Title 8, which is sort of the normal immigration regime under which we process people at the border. So there was the expectation that people will just come in droves now. And there was this picture of chaos at the border. It hasn't happened. The numbers in the last 2 weeks is that the border arrivals have gone down. Border arrivals have gone down like 50%. At the last day of Title 42, 10,000 people came to our US border. In the last 3 days, 3,000 to 4,000 people have come. So numbers, you could say, my God, we should just declare victory. We did something right here. I think it's too early to say that we should take victory laps. I think we all who study border know that these things are not lasting phenomena for a very long time. I think migrants are smart people. They're smarter than almost anyone in this field. They are making their calculations. They're trying to see what the world after Title 42 is going to look like. Look, if 10,000 people show up at the border, does the US have capacity to process 10,000 people? That's what happened under Title 42. Why Title 42 had lost its salience? Because under Title 42, if you showed up and expelled you, we didn't keep any record of you either. We didn't process them. We didn't say, where did you come from? What was your background? Even do national, we just expelled them. With the result that there was no consequence to your removal. With the result that smart people just made repeated attempts. If you didn't get in the first time, you would get the second time, by the fifth time, you would get in. And that word had spread. Keep trying. That in the lottery system, odds are pretty good that you will get in. So ironically, a policy that was supposed to expel people actually led more people in. So we now have Title 8. As I like to say to people, Title 8 is much more punitive than Title 42 ever was. Because under Title 8, we put you in expedited removal. Expedited removal, Kathleen will remember this better than anybody, was put in place in 1996 in the Clinton regime. Let's remember that. It was said that if you come to the US without authorization, we'll just give you a quick turnaround under expedited basis. And in that expedited removal, if you apply for protection of asylum, we will give you a hearing. But if you don't, we expel you. So you would say, actually, logical, well, if this is expedited, why is expedited removal not faster than expulsion? The fact is, as I said, in the expulsions, you didn't even create a record. So it would take much less time to expel someone than to expeditedly remove someone. So it was more expedient to do expel than to expeditedly remove, pardon the 3 E's of the word in one sentence. That was the magic of expulsions. It worked, except you knew that you could make repeated attempts and come back. Now you can't do that. You're going under Title 8. We can give you more punitive. If you come under expedited removal, we remove you. You can't come back for the next 5 years, even legally. And if you make another illegal entry, you're another felon. So there are real consequences to expedited removal. And some smart networks of immigrants have realized that. Look, this is not as easy as Title 42. If you now come your process, there'll be a consequence now. And these are ripe networks. I mean, the social network in this is social media, and this is so important a network. So I think immigrants or migrants are just making calculations about whether the administration has the ability to process so many people. I don't think we have ability to process more than 5,000 people a day. That means if 6,000 people come, it's quite likely everyone after 5,000 plus is going to be let in. So we may have, in many ways, back to the Title 42 era, where a lot of people were allowed into the country because we didn't even have time to process them. To me, that's a crisis. And this crisis then has impact on not-for-profit organizations who have to process them at the border. They now have filtering impact on cities like New York and Chicago and Denver, where people are now bused by Governor Abbott. So both in terms of its real impact on immigrants and the infrastructure of not-for-profit organizations and the impact on cities, I think it is a long-term huge impact. So again, do we have a solution? Yes. We have thought about one response to this, which addresses this challenge. And we think it is we should acknowledge it as a crisis, but we should not be compromised by it. It is a crisis that we can manage. It's a crisis that we can manage humanely. It's a crisis that we can manage with due respect to our laws and our commitment under international law to the protection norms that we must adhere to. So our idea is that, look, everyone who comes to the US that then come to New York and Boston, all that, they all apply for asylum because there are no other legal pathways. Whether they're eligible for asylum or no, they apply for asylum. You're given a quick screening at the border. We call that credible fear determination. At the credible fear determination, someone basically is, do you pass the threshold test for eligibility. If we pass the threshold test, you are then sent into a court system in the US where you complete your asylum application. That court system is so backlogged today that it takes about 7 years to get a hearing. The backlog today is like 2.3 million. So the backlog has become the magnet. Again, the smugglers and their networks, but look, if you just make it to the US, you use the word asylum, you will come in, nothing's going to happen to you for 7 years, and then you can work legally. Because everyone who's an asylum applicant, we allow them to work legally. So this magnet of the backlog has to be addressed. So we have advanced the idea that judges should no longer do asylum cases. The system is too backlogged. And it's not even a good system. That all asylum claims, people should be allowed to make asylum claims, but they should be done by asylum officers. Asylum officers are trained people. They're not judges, but they know country conditions frequently better than judges do. And they're non-adversarial proceedings. You can show up without a lawyer. You can bring a lawyer if you want. You can show it without, but this is a much of a informal hearing than a hearing before an immigration judge. And those decisions can be made in months as against years. Again, so that we are true to our Constitution, you must still get a review by a judge. I don't think we can get rid of judicial review. But that review can happen much faster than having a completely new hearing before another immigration judge. I think if we move from judges to asylum officers making this determination, this job can be done within a year as against 7 years. And if we do that, then people who are truly eligible for asylum would get their status within a year and be integrated into our society. And people who don't qualify and then their review doesn't change the decision, they should be removed. That only when we have a system which in a fair and fast way allows people to have their processes, their applications for asylum claim processed in the US, can we have some integrity in the system. I think people today have lost the faith in the integrity of our asylum system, both in the right and in the left. And I think we have to reclaim it. And this is one way to reclaim it. And once we bring that in some order, I think that message reverberates all across the migrant spheres. That look, you can come to the US, but don't expect that just by using the word asylum, you're going to get the protection of the country for next 7 years. I think if we manage to get that new regime going, we will have brought some semblance of order to the border. We can never restore complete order to the border. No one should be under a delusion, but at least we can make a dent. And if we make a dent at the challenge of the border, if we improve our legal immigration selection system, I think the combination of the two may be as close to a fair system on immigration that we all want to see. Thank you.
Now. So this is the time for questions. We have some folks with mics that will come around as well. And those who are online, can you please put your questions in the chat, and we'll be monitoring those questions. And Ted Bain is going to help us with those questions. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is fascinating. Will you address another category, which are the dreamers? I recently heard how many dreamers are in this country, and I don't have the nerdy command of numbers that you have, but I was astonished by the number. And it seemed to me that there are probably political motivations for not moving them into citizenship, because they might, in fact, be prone to be quite democratic in their voting. So why don't we just ignore them? What do we do with the dreamers, and what chance do we have to find a way to accommodate them in our broader society.
Yeah, thank you. So dreamers, so all of you know what dreamers are. These are kids who were brought by their parents when they were extremely young, and the parents came unauthorized, so the family is unauthorized. But these are kids who have grown up in the U.S., and many people think they're all Americans except in paper. This is actually one of the most sympathetic groups of people, of immigrants in the U.S. There is really significant support for dreamers, both among Republicans and Democrats, and has been since 2000. The first DREAM Act, Kathleen, correct me, was introduced in 2001 by her boss, Senator Kennedy and McCain together. I mean, was it Durbin and Kennedy, or? Yeah. So bipartisan, huh? Yeah. I mean, even Senator Grassley, who's one of the most strong anti-immigrants in the Senate, supports dreamers, because everyone's believed that, look, they've grown here. They're not going away. It's better to educate them. It's better to integrate them. So, but again, the paralysis doesn't allow it to happen. So even though if you took a vote just on dreamers today, I think it would get a majority vote in the House and the Senate. But the Speaker will not allow for the bill even to come to the floor. That's where we have gotten stuck. And this is where I was telling you the connection to the border comes. That they always say the border is the excuse. Unless we get the border under control, we can't act even on dreamers. So this is why I think the border issue has to be addressed. It's become the fallback attack on everything on immigration. Look, this is simple. We're there. We want to help them, but not till the border is under control. Then come and talk to me. So that's why the border has become both a real issue as an excuse. So President Obama took a big risk, I thought, in 2012, and through executive action, granted dreamers a pathway to some semblance of status, that they can get protection against removal and they can work legally in the country. This benefit is called the DACA. So there are DACA beneficiaries. There are more than 500,000 people a year. Trump tried to end DACA. Let's not forget. And that's gone into litigation. It went to a judge in Texas, who many people thought was going to end DACA because he had ended a similar program for the elders in 2014. He didn't end DACA, to the surprise of many of us. He acted like a judge, I thought. He said, look, people who already have it, I'm not going to take the benefit away from them. But since I believe this program is unlawful, I'm not going to let any more people enroll. So there are a lot of people who could be eligible for the DACA benefit, but cannot because of the judge's decision. So it is valid still for people who had it under Obama's first order. And that case is coming for its next hearing sometime in the next 6 weeks or so. So DACA could end. It's quite likely DACA could end. And then we'll go, with Supreme Court will obviously rule on it. This is my favorite thing to say, is that DACA has become this classic case where all three branches of the government push the can to the other branch. When the Supreme Court is about to rule, they say, oh my God, we heard the Congress may be acting. Maybe we could postpone it for a few more months and postpone the hearings on this. In the meantime, when Congress says the DACA kids may be removed, no. The Supreme Court has just given them a relief. That's not. So it's become sort of everyone shifts the blame to anyone else. At the end of the day, only Congress can give lasting, enduring benefits to DACA kids. And I think that should happen. So in my vision, if we don't have, and I don't want to leave unaddressed your question about why there's a political reason not to give it to them. I think there's a political reason not to give legalization to the 11.5 million people. Same is that I think many Republicans have concluded that immigrants are sort of unofficial members of the Democratic Party. So if you're Mitch McConnell, why would you like to make 11.5 more new Democrats? That's a political reality. That's what I was saying in the beginning. It's not about facts. It's about power. It's really about raw political power. So if you can imagine 10 million people getting legalized, and let's assume only 2 million of them are in the battleground states, where they could change the political calculus, you understand why this is highly politicized issue. I think DACA is less so, but you could postpone citizenship. I mean, one way to do this is, sure, we'll get you lawful permanent residence, but you can't become immediate citizens. I can see a compromise like that. If people are concerned about the political calculus, you could do something like that. Give them status. Let's delay the citizenship because that's where it is. That's why I favor that if we just get one piece of legislation, a small board, like the Dreamers in, it would be a victory, because we would get over this hump that we cannot pass any immigration legislation. That you have to start building what I call the muscles again for a bipartisan act on immigration. So in this regard, you should all know a bill was introduced 2 days ago. It's the first bipartisan bill introduced in about 10 years by two women congresswomen, Maria Salazar, a Republican from Florida, and Veronica Escobar from Texas. And it has a lot of border security provisions, but it has a provision for Dreamers. To me, Dreamers, agricultural workers are the two important subgroups of people which are ripe for legislation. If we just acted on that without acting on anything else, I think it'll be a good thing to do.
Thank you very much for this comprehensive and thoughtful analysis. I raised my hand a minute ago because I wanted to, excuse me, to ask you your view of the Dignity Act that was introduced 2 days ago by the two congresswomen. Because as I understand it, it includes a huge component at the border for a combination of beefed up border patrol, but also the creation of campuses and a 60-day process for families to be processed, and it addresses a large number of other issues. And could you expand both a bit more about the substance, but does this also make an opening, since it is bipartisan, since it's a Republican Congresswoman, Cuban from Miami, to possibly start as the first step in breaking the logjam?
Now you're ahead of me. I'm glad you read the bill. I mean, that's why I think this is a promising event. I think they're both really smart. Maria Salazar is not only, I think, she's a former television star. She used to be a host of a television program, a popular television program. So she has personality to promote it. I think this is a really good sign. I really do. I think I like actually most provisions of that bill. And let me tell you why. First of all, it does look at the border. As I said, we can never, ever pass an immigration bill without an enforcement component. In fact, I'll now say something which I hope I'll never get contradicted. Kathleen may contradict me more. Congress has never, ever passed an immigration bill where the first title was not about enforcement. From 1880s to 1990, the first chapter of any immigration bill is enforcement. Because at the end of the day, that's what members of Congress do. They write restrictive laws. I mean, so we managed to put in some liberating laws, but their job is to restrict. Okay. So I think we have to have enforcement just because it's not going to happen without it. But there's smart enforcement and there's completely meaningless enforcement. Building a wall is a meaningless enforcement. I mean, to build a 700-foot wall for a 2,100-foot border, what kind of sense does it make? Except to give a lot of money to defense contractors who just folded up their business in Iraq and Afghanistan. Seriously, it has no purpose. But the campus thing that you're talking about, processing facilities, I'm a big fan of. I think one of the reasons why we have a crisis at the border is that we don't have a campus-like atmosphere. Border Patrol picks people up. And I spent time with the border. I actually went for the first time on a boat in Colorado River with Border Patrol people. And they do really as good a job as they can. As they like to say, they cannot outsource their job to anyone else. It's like cops, they have to deal with it. It's sort of the downstream thing then. What does ICE do with them? What does asylum officers do with? What do judges with them? But they have all they can keep on, they have no choice. They have to pick the guy up. And they have been told that once you pick the guy up, you must finish the job. You can't keep anyone for more than 24 hours. So this is why what I learned, which is what we liberals make mistakes. A Border Patrol officer cannot even give a bottle of water to someone they confront at the border. Because the moment they give them a bottle of water, the 24 hours start clocking. So if they know that the processing is not going to finish within 24 hours, they don't even give a bottle of water. Now, that doesn't make any sense in the activist world to me. So keep that apart. So they do just Border Patrol. There's not even ICE there. There's not even lawyers there. There's not even there should be all government working together across agencies. So you must not only have Border Patrol there, you must have USCIS, Citizenship and Immigration Service officers. You must have asylum officers there. You must have lawyers there, all in a campus. If you put them all in one building, I think it doesn't work. I don't think Border Patrol and lawyers ever want to meet each other. But if you put them on a campus, when they will be on the campus with different buildings, you could actually have some joint cohesive, because all of them need lawyers. All of them need some device given by ICE to track you. These are the devices now. Everyone gets a cell phone. We no longer give ankle bracelets to people, thank God. But we can track them on the ICE gives you, but they can't do that at the border. So I think and then ORR, which takes care of kids. Unaccompanied cannot be put in ICE detention. If all these agencies, plus FEMA, actually, which is the most experienced in dealing with emergencies, if all of them are on one campus, then I think you actually have a good chance for a humanitarian response with a good legal input into it for it to become sort of a comprehensive. So I think, and then you have the provision about dreamers. So as a bipartisan mini comprehensive immigration bill, I think it's a really good start.
I have a question myself. I have some concern about asylum officers, although what's going on now, as you said, is totally unworkable. And my concern is whether asylum officers can be properly trained, not just to recognize country conditions as they truly are, but also to recognize trauma and its impact on people coming before them, that people often can't speak or tell their story. I've run into this quite a lot. So how would you imagine training asylum officers to be able truly to recognize whether someone is deserving or not?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And the question was that whether asylum officers are well trained to screen people for their trauma that they have faced in the country of their origin, which would make them eligible for protection. And assumption is that asylum officers are not trained right now. Is that's?
Not necessarily, but I think there's a huge variety, shall we say, of levels of expertise.
Yeah, I think you're right. All I can tell you, there's a huge variety among judges. There are some judges who grant asylum applications 85% of the time, and another judge sitting in the same court will grant only 5% of the time. I'm actually much more concerned about that disparity. And I actually happen to believe that you can actually train asylum officers better than you can train judges. First of all, a good core of us of asylum officers come from very interesting backgrounds. They're not, most of our immigration judges today have a law enforcement background. They're either prosecutors, they're judge advocate generals. A lot of them come from the army. A lot of them come from local. I'm not sure that's the best profile for fair judges. I haven't seen the profile of asylum officers, but I think I can guess it's different than judges. It's a more varied group. And I think when we make the shift that asylum officers are going to be reliant, then the nature and the quality of training should change. That someone really should tell them, look, this is what trauma is. This is how we have seen trauma in El Salvador or Honduras and all that. So we can get experts talking to them. And I think that is much more easy to do than judges, because that's a much more formal structure. I mean, you have to get so many clearances for judges to be educated than asylum officers. So I think if it's an education task, which I think it is, I think it's easier to do that with asylum officers than to do that with. And the judges, they have to do everything from family petition to asylum. Now, they have a broad. Here we're saying that these people can just be trained in looking at the qualifications of asylum. And you can even make them country specialists. That, to me, at least without, and obviously need to train them, I'm not disagreeing with. But I think it's better chance to educate them than to educate judges. And by the way, still, at the end of the day, Jane, they would still get a review. That if someone has made a completely erroneous decision, you would still get a review before a judge. You would get a review all the way to the Supreme Court still.
And continuing on the subject of how we determine who's eligible for asylum, I want to believe that most people confronted with the individual stories that I hear from asylum seekers would want to help that fellow human being in some way. And yet the legal categories of who's eligible and who's not eligible and what kind of particular group you need to come in don't necessarily correlate well with who's in need of assistance. Yeah. And I wonder how we can even get to a national conversation about that. It's easier for people just to close their ears and say, there's so much pain and suffering all over the world and we just can't take care of everybody and I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's fundamental question is that the asylum system is determined by a set of laws, by both national law and international law. And they are congruent. I mean, we got our national law finally only in 1980, thanks to Senator Kennedy. I mean, before 1980, you realize we had no refugee law in our country. It was only Senator Kennedy's big footprint that got us the Refugee Act of 1980. You should get huge credit for that. And before that, we only gave refugee status to people who were fleeing from communist countries. I mean, we just figured that's only 40 years ago. So we haven't backed up, we have improved. So we now have a ideological basis for asylum, but they're based on only 5 grounds. And those 5 grounds are the same grounds as the UN Convention is. So we follow UN Convention. So in some ways, if our laws have to change, that conversation has to happen at the international level. That is the world changing its view of who are deserving of asylum. I mean, some people think that, look, asylum was meant for a very narrow category of people. It was people fleeing Putin, That's the kind of, Baryshnikov fleeing Russia, Soviet Union at that time, was the kind of people that we had in mind. That's the argument. But on the other hand, I think we can all agree that just because someone wants a better life in the US does not mean that they're eligible for asylum. Asylum has to have some parameters. Otherwise, basically, you're saying anyone who wants a better life, it should be able to come. That is a huge fraction of the world. And at that point, we all have to ask our questions, how much of the fraction of the world can we take? I mean, if 20 million people a year want to come to the US to improve their lives, and I have sympathy with all of them, can we take 20 million people a year? That's a question for all citizens to take. And the welcoming impulse says we should take anyone who wants to come here. And that's the true impulse. It's the right impulse. It's the Statue of Liberty impulse. It's our historic impulse. But all I can tell you after having watched this phenomenon of busing is that every welcoming impulse comes with a cost. We then have to be prepared to pay for that welcome. And there are three major elements of cost in welcoming people. One is housing, one is education, and third is healthcare. In a place like New York, all these three things are big, expensive tickets. Of all places, housing in New York for working class people, you just can't afford it. For someone who just comes with no family attachment, to give them housing is expensive. Healthcare, we know what is for all of us. So imagine someone who has no attachment to the country. So unless we are willing to take the cost of all these three big items, I think we have to really then question how many people can we take. I don't think we can take 20 million, but I think we can take 4 times more than we take today. And if we do that, then many people who have to fake their claim as asylum, because that's the magic word they can use, don't have to fake their way in. I mean, we just giving the example of the Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. The time when President Biden introduced this new asylum rule, he also at the same time said, we're going to allow 30,000 Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans to come on parole. That's increasing legal pathways. So those nationals of those 4 countries don't have to turn themselves into a pretzel to say they're fleeing persecution. They can just come because they think we can't afford, we can't make a living in Venezuela. That's one way of getting more truth in the system. I mean, I think once sort of fraudulent claims or insincere claims come into, then it affects the whole system. As simple truth is that a true asylum seeker today cannot get an asylum for 7 years because the courts are backlogged in dealing with a deluge of cases. Now, that's not good for asylum seekers either. So if we shrink the population of people who actually should be processed for asylum, increase the pathway for legal immigration in non-asylum categories determined by the labor market, then you can have more honesty in the system.
Questions? And you can, I'll read both of them because you may decide that one should be taken first. The current administration has established intake locations in both Central and South America. Will these immigrants be categorized as asylees if they pass a credible fear test? That's the first one. The second question is interesting too, in that what 1 or 2 issues should a small group of committed people like our group put their resources? What's the spot where they could make a difference?
So I've been asked to repeat, I should repeat the question. Let me do my best to be honest to what you said. The first one was that the US, the Biden administration in this case, has established various regional processing centers, we call them, in countries in Latin America will people be screened there for their credible fear determination for asylum and then let into the US? That's the first question, is that right? The second was for a small group, I would say, committed group like ours, what is the best way they can make a difference in the present politicals? So, you all can answer the second question better, clearly, but let me take a stab on the first. Yeah, I mean, this is why, the Biden administration never gets full credit for what it does. I mean, this is just my peak. I mean, they are not particularly good at promoting themselves. I mean, a lot of people think, advocates included, that Biden has not made much difference on immigration. I tend to disagree. I think he has made a lot of changes on immigration. In fact, those of you who have time, I wrote a piece on it, Biden at 2, and the second year anniversary of Biden administration came, and it's on our website. I'll send it to Joyce, you can send it out. What all accomplishments Biden has had. And they are on all fronts listen, the most important front is interior enforcement. Never gets enough credit. At the end of the Trump administration, every unauthorized person in this country woke up in the morning not sure whether they will come home. No matter what your record was. That's no longer true. I mean, that's existential in the life of unauthorized people. That unless you've committed a crime, you're not going to be removed. That's, in the lives of people hugely. That happened by change in the administration. So on the question that you're raising, they have tried to develop, I think, to me, one of the more comprehensive sets of policies. So one, they set up these, you can seek an appointment on an app. It's called the CBP-1. If you think you're eligible, you show up at the port of entry, we'll screen you there. So there is order instead of disorder. I like that. And if you come between ports of entry, we will deem you ineligible for asylum, which is controversial. But they made exemptions for that for many categories. Then they established these regional processing centers. Look, if you don't want to come to the Mexican border, but you think you're eligible for asylum, we will, in these Central American countries, establish processing centers where you can make the same claim as you would make for asylum inside the US. It probably won't be called credible fear determination. It'll be called something else, because that's a nomenclature used for determination in the US, but it'll be something similar. That if we believe you have some threshold eligibility, we'll admit you in. They'll also be used to someone if they have a relative in the US. There are a lot of kids, actually, unaccompanied kids especially, they want to join their parents here, who could sponsor them sometime in the future. But right now they can't. People like that will be allowed to come on a parole. So people who have some legitimate basis to be in the US sometime in the future will be allowed to get that kind of help at the processing centers. That is the idea. Hope it works. There's a particular program for Central American minors. So we hold the Central American minor program will be done for these programs. On what you can do, actively, I think you know it the best. There are 2 levels of doing this work. One is, it's like many of us are trying to change the world, but it's hard to change the world. But there's so much need on a daily basis for people. At some level, that's concrete, that a lot of people focus their time and attention on changing the world. But on the basis that people need services next day. I mean, I think people in my field who need just a lawyer to accompany them to the next hearing. That is life-changing for them. Someone who is coming to the Darien Gap and through the cartels who everyone has exploited, suddenly meets someone saying, you're now in the US, we'll protect you. I mean, that's huge. And if that comes from not necessarily a lawyer, but a paraprofessional, we have become big fans of paraprofessionals. And the world is changing in this. Like physicians are not the only people who provide remedies for this thing. We think a highly trained paralegal can be very effective in immigration, probably sometimes better than a lawyer. Then you have a psychologist who is better trained than in trauma than a lawyer. A psychologist with a lawyer from a local community is hugely helpful. You multiply this in a library. It's my favorite example is that if someone is trying to become a naturalized citizen, and if they get a mentor for a year who is a US born raised person who adopts them for a year. We gave an award to a Colorado library, that's why I remember this, where they had a program just to take people on an individual basis, take them into their family for a year. That, look, you're about to become naturalized. We'll help you naturalize by being part of our family for a year. They see the American customs, they see what the traditions are, they get used to a different food, and then you train them in naturalization examination, all in one. I mean, that's deeply American and so close to reality. I think all those things where people's actual needs are met are huge in the lives of people. And then the other side is, do politics. I mean, members of Congress are still susceptible to local politicians. I think governors have become now very important to this issue. I like to say the governors are some of the best lobbyists in the country. When a governor speaks to his senator, it makes a difference. So make this local. Say why this is important to Massachusetts. Why is this important to Boston? And that makes a difference, even for members of Congress who may be reluctant to do what they really should need to do. I think Kathleen.
Addendum to what my friend and former colleague Musafir said, which would be that there are very sophisticated advocates and activists on the border, as you folks have probably met a lot of them, and particularly if you've been there. And when people ask me a similar question, what I say is that my advocacy support, and sometimes my advocacy dollars when I can afford it, go to Border Network for Human Rights in El Paso, the Southern Border Communities Coalition in the San Diego area. And why those organizations? Because they work in the Texas border, California border, other borders with elected officials who are responsible to the citizens who are in those areas. They see what the effect of militarization of the border is, which is, one thing that Musafir didn't touch on is the fact that year after year after year, Congress appropriates money for the Border Patrol, for border enforcement that doesn't get spent because they can't hire the people. It's a major problem. We have a highly militarized border. And if you talk with advocates on the border, including elected officials on the border, they will tell you, we definitely want money on the border, but we want money so that the entry system, the legal border crossing system works. I would say it's obviously always important to be contacting our elected officials here in Massachusetts because they do care about this, but I would be supporting advocates at the border to be working with their own elected officials at the border who can then be, talking with their members of Congress. I think this may take decades, but I think overall it's the, citizens, businesses, and elected officials at the border that really have to be leading. Sure, Border Network for Human Rights in El Paso, and the Southern Border Communities Coalition in San Diego are two that I've done work with in the past as part of, I did some work with Detention Watch Network quite a long time ago.
And the San Diego people I met with, and they do great work.
I have one question myself, and it jibes with what I'm seeing on the Zoom chat. The question on Zoom chat is any federal or national group working on these improved ideas, yours, what we heard tonight, with hope of change sooner than later, or has political ground prevented all progress? We like what you're saying. Where else are these ideas being espoused and organized around?
Well, we socialize these ideas. Our job is to do thinking, but also build support. So we actually meeting with individual sectors of the economy leaders from, restaurant owners, construction people, IT industry, bankers, because I think the support for our idea has to come from those. I spoke to a big business group this morning only because I think they're important to this. I think business groups are really important. But to me, two other parts of the campaign is church. I mean, church is very important. And universities are very important. Law enforcement is important. To me, if these four groups of people actually formed a coalition on issues, even they don't agree on everything, but they can agree on four things, that is a very potent coalition. So we're trying to reach out to groups in these, and I think that's sort of the right set of people in a coalition to go. And you can do this locally. Just every time it's like if the cardinal and the president of Harvard and the president of a major group came together, that's powerful in a city like Boston. You could replicate that in New York. You could replicate that in St. Louis, and you could replicate that in Miami. If we did that in 5 or 6 major cities, then you might say the ground will shift. Joyce, you don't have to give me anything. I'll come down.
I'm afraid I have something for you. I just want to thank you for just a wonderful presentation.
Thanks so much. Thank you for.
Thanks from all of us. And we have just a small, kind of big gift for you.
Doesn't look that small.
And this has been incredible. Just a wonderful discussion among all of us. And
thank you for coming.
I'm sorry there's a lot of people who missed a wonderful presentation. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.